Hello and welcome to a new episode of the Yarnflakes Podcast. My name is Audrey. I am a knitwear designer from the southwest of France, and this is a podcast where I share all the knitting projects that I'm making. Hi, thank you so much for joining me. I hope you're doing well. Weather report. So we will have an episode a bit darker than the previous one. If you've watched the previous podcast episode, I was so smug and proud and so happy of the nice sunny weather that I was like, yay, this is spring. So obviously now it's snowing and it's rather dark, but I'm in denial. I decide to be in denial. It's been a few years anyway since there's basically no spring. Where I live, it's been going from 10 Celsius degrees to 40 with no transition, and I hate this. So I've decided to live my life pretending, and if I tell myself something enough, maybe I will actually start believing it. So let's just pretend. And I guess this is kind of why I have a podcast that's a little bit a mix of things, you know. It's a bit uncertain what it wants to be. Some projects are lighter, some are more heavy. It's just, yeah, an in-between podcast. So I hope it will still be somewhat enjoyable. And yes, you can find timestamps to all the different sections of the podcast in the description down below. So if you want to skip anything, or if you want to find a project in particular, feel free to look at this. I also put links to everything that I talk about, my patterns, which are for sale on Ravelry Payhip, my social media, my Patreon page if you would like to support me, as well as the patterns and the link and the yarns that I will be mentioning. I did that in the wrong order, but you get the idea. I'm going to start with what I'm wearing, which is a new design that I just published, and it is the Felise sweater. And it is a springy drop shot. I just drank water and I cannot for the life of me drink water without spilling it all over me. It is a bottom-up drop shoulder sweater. So you start with a 2x2 ribbing, and you have this texture panel on one side, which is made of twisted stitches, garter stitch squares, some twisted cables, and some simple cables. And it goes all the way to the top. The rest of the sweater is in simple stockinette, including the back. And yeah, you reach the armhole and you separate front and back to knit them flat until the neckline. You shape a round neckline, then you make some short rows to shape the shoulder. Then you pick up stitches around the armholes to knit the sleeves in the round. They are fitted with some decreases, and then you make a folded collar if you want to. So the way I make my folded collars is collars. So I knit twice the ribbon length that I want, then I fold it inside, and I don't bind off the stitches. I whip stitch the live stitches to the pickup line, and I found that this is the best way to have something that is nice and fits my head, because every time I've tried to actually bind off the stitches and then sew them down, it's just way too tight. So yeah, but of course you can skip the fold if you just want to bind off here. And yeah, this is a very simple garment with a very basic construction that is easy to adapt, of course. So I'm wearing mine with quite some ease. I have about 20 centimeter ease, but it happens to look quite nice if it's more fitted as well. You can see some of my testers, by choice or by gauge issues, ended up with something that is much more fitted, and it works really well. I would recommend that if you want something a little bit more close to your body measurements, that you probably will want to adjust the upper arm, either by not decreasing as soon here on the sleeves, or you can also adjust the armhole depth and pick up more stitches if you want. But yeah, so I made mine cropped because this is how I do things, but of course it's easy to adjust. And yeah, the panel comes charted and written, so if you're having issues reading charts, the written instructions are there. It comes in different sizes for the different sizes so that it's about the same proportion on every size. But yeah, some of them have wider cables, etc., depending on which size you're knitting. And yeah, so my sleeves are always bracelet length because I'm just constantly doing this anyway. I just hate having sleeves inside whatever it is that I'm doing. So yeah, I used a yarn that is sadly discontinued. It's the Merino Tencel yarn from Katya Yarns. So some yarn shops might still have some stock. It is basically a Merino Tencel brand. I think it was 70% Tencel and 30% Merino. It's a sport weight yarn. Basically, any Merino Tencel blends, like a lot of dyers, indie dyers have those blends now. So this is like the go-to substitute. It's essentially the same thing. It's a sport weight yarn and it will give you the same result for a spring jumper. I do want to talk a little bit about this because I think it's interesting with this project. The gauge of the garment is 22 stitches per 10 centimeter. So for a sport weight yarn, pretty regular. This one has a lot of drape, and so it makes something that's really nice and springy. But you will see if you check the testers versions that a lot of them used very different things. And so when you have whatever weight your yarn is, the recommended gauge that is on the yarn label, it's you're not tied to that. This is a standard gauge for a fabric that is basic, not too loose, not too dense. But this may change. You may have different gauge with a certain type of yarn, depending on the technique that you're knitting it with. Some techniques tend to tighten the gauge, like cables or colourwork. Other techniques tend to work better with looser gauge, like lace, garter stitch, etc. It also depends on the type of projects that you're making. So if you're making a garment, you may want a certain standard gauge, but if you're making a shawl, maybe you want something that's looser. Fingering weight shawls tend to have a 18 to 20 stitch gauge per 10 centimeter, 4 inches. And that would be very airy and very loose as a garment, but as a shawl, it's pretty classic because you want the drape for a shawl. So what technique are you knitting, the type of projects that you're making, but also, and that's kind of what I want to talk about, your personal preference. You may like denser or looser fabrics than others. I know that I tend to not like very dense things. It's very rare that I make a project that has a tight fabric. I prefer looser, drapier knits, which is why I won't have any issue making a garment, a fingering weight garment with a 22 stitch gauge, because it's gonna have some fabric that is a bit airy and drapey, and that's great for me. But a lot of people think that is way too loose and they prefer something that is tighter, neater, and that is a little bit more consistent. And that is great. And what's fun about a project like this, which sits at the 22 stitch gauge, is that you can go either way. So I use a sport weight. Sport weight, it actually has a meterage of 130 meters per 50 grams, so it's almost a DK, but because it has so much tencel, it's too drapey, and it's a little bit finer than what you'd expect. Some knitters, some of my testers, chose to have a sweater that was a bit more wintry, and so they used a DK weight. You know, if if you don't want to deny the fact that it's actually 0 degrees Celsius right now, like I am. I don't know what you're talking about. It's not cold. But DK weight works great for this sweater. There are some testers versions in Penelope from the Herum Natura, which is their worsted spun DK weight, which is a blend of merino and silk. And it's lovely because the silk gives it a nice drape. Some people used a yak blends, for example. Any yarn that has a little bit of drape, DK weight, will work really well for this garment because 22 stitch gauge for DK weight is perfectly standard, and you will just have something that's a little bit more wintry, and it won't be as loosey-goosey as mine. The reason I love sport weight so much is that it's bang on in the middle. It's not too loose and it's not too warm for me. And so yeah, sport weight yarns around 300 meters per 100 grams, perfect for this. But there are also testers who used fingering weight. And if you're using a fingering weight that's not too sleek, that blooms a tiny bit, it will work really well, and you won't necessarily have something that's too loose. It depends on personal preference, really. So you just have to see how loose you can knit the texture while still maintaining definition. That's the thing that you'll have to test is, do you like how this looks in your gauge? Not in your gauge, you'll have the patterns gauge, but in your density, depending on the type of thickness of yarn that you use. And so some testers used Bio Balance by BC Garn, which is a cotton and wool blend that is a little bit heathery, and it does not bloom per se, but it knits up thicker than what you think. But it's technically a fingering weight, and it works really well, and it has a really nice definition on the texture. Other testers used the Rerum Natura's Albertine, which is the same yarn as the Penelope, but a fingering weight. So some people use the DK, some people use the fingering. Both work. I have a cardigan that I knitted with that yarn, Albertine, that merino silk blend, at this gauge, at the 22 stitch gauge, and it's a really nice cardigan. This yarn from the Rerum Natura is very round, and so it tends to fill in the space a little bit more compared to other type of silk blend yarns. So some people use sock yarns, especially one that had a bit of nettle fiber in it, which added a really nice sheen, which is what I'm getting here from the tencel. So tencel is a cellulose fiber. It's like the man-made version of bamboo. It's just not necessarily made from wood like bamboo viscose is. So, and it has the same very drapey effect. So if you're using something with silk, something with BFL, which are drapey and nice, you'll get similar things. But yeah, just to show that you can basically make this garment as a winter sweater or as a more spring summer lighter weight, depending on the type of yarn that you use. And yeah, I just wanted to talk a little bit about this because I really want to encourage people to make sure that they know the type of fabric that they like. I know gauge issues are a little bit triggering for some people, and that most of you have ran away by now, but you are not confined to what I choose to do as a designer, and there's a lot of freedom into changing the fabric and learning what works depending on the type of project and depending on your preference. One gauge can mean very different things depending on the yarn that you use. There's even more complexity if you're bringing the type of fiber that is, or the type of plies and spinning that is in that yarn, but already changing yarn thickness will give you very different results. And so yeah, if you want some inspiration, you can check the Testers project to see what they did. Obviously you can skip the folded color, I don't know if I said that already. You can make it however long you want, and that is Felise, which is now available on Ravelry and Payhip, and there is a little 15% discount code on Ravelry with the code Felise if you would like to get it now, basically. It will be valid until Sunday. So yeah, that's it for the new pattern release for the sort of mid-season garment. And I have a couple of works in progress that I would like to share with you now. So, if you haven't watched previous episode, I have spent the last month or so submitting to magazines and making a lot of swatches. So I haven't been able to knit a lot of my personal projects, but now I am done for now. And I have gone back to knitting my colourwork blanket. So I am knitting the Indian Nights blanket from Janice Hope, which is an all-over fingering weight blanket with lots of colourwork, all-over colourwork. And basically you knit it in pieces and then you seam it all together, you graft it all together, and you make a rectangle. I am having so much fun with this. I've mentioned this before, but the way I kind of read colourwork charts, I don't really count stitches. I know a lot of people, they will see 3 white stitches, 2 black, 1 white, 2 black, and they will count like this. I don't tend to do this. I need a much more visual clue. So, for example, okay, the way I read my charts is I very rarely print patterns, but it's about the same. I open the chart on my PDF reader, right? And I scroll so that the row that I'm on is at the top. I don't see what's above, but I see what I've done before, what's below. And basically I will see, this will match my knitting, right? And so I can see that there's a little shape in contrast color. Say it's like a square, and I see that the row I'm on, that squares shift 1 stitch to the right, or there's 2 black dots and I need to make 1 in the center now. That's kind of how I view my colourwork and how I read the chart. I don't really count. I just compare it to the previous row. This means 2 things. The first one is that I'm highly dependent on being on the right side, which is why I like sticking. I don't like knitting colourwork flat. Not because it's difficult. A lot of people don't like it because they don't like purling. That's not what bothers me. I don't mind purling. I don't mind handling the floats on the wrong side. What is a problem for me is not seeing the right side of my work matching the chart. Of course, if I'm on the wrong side, I could just look at the stitches on my needle, but because I'm knitting from right to left, right? I'm right-handed. So if I'm on the wrong side row, I'm knitting it from right to left. But if I'm following the chart, I need to knit it to follow it from left to right. And that does not work with my brain. It does not. It's just, I can't do that. Gymnastic. It just doesn't work. So I much prefer having the right side, so being in the round. That's the first thing. The second thing is that I need to see the chart all the time. I kind of always have it at the corner of my eye. I can't read when I'm making colourwork. I can usually read when I'm knitting, even lace or cables, as long as it's a repetitive pattern. And the book is not too complicated, right? I can easily knit and read at the same time. Not with colourwork, because I kind of always want to look at it. And this makes colourwork knitting very immersive for me, because I'm kind of in my bubble. I have my chart, I have some video going that doesn't necessarily need me to watch it so much. I can't watch shows whose language I don't understand, for example. I've tried to watch some Korean dramas, but I can't knit colourwork and look at the subtitles at the same time. So if I'm watching something in French, in English or Spanish, bit difficult. But other languages that I really have no understanding on, no way. So yeah, because I'm just with my chart and it's like a little bubble that is a bit difficult to get out of. I'm so into it and it's so much fun. So I took the blanket again to work on it last Sunday, and I started in the morning, and I told myself, okay, I'm gonna knit a little bit for a couple of hours this morning, and then I have to do other things. No, it was 6 in the evening when I realized, oh, I am still knitting that blanket. It's just so fun and so engaging, especially because, so it's small pieces, like I said, which is why I love it. Like, I've tried to make blankets that are one big piece and I just don't like it. Like, I just can't. I'm trying to think if I could make a modular type of blanket, join as you go. But what I love about this is that I'm just making small pieces, right? And they do knit up pretty quickly. Even though it's fingering weight, I'm on 3mm needles. They still knit up fairly quickly because they're small pieces, right? And there are lots of colors used in that blanket, and each color section is a bit short, so it has that thing where you're like, oh, let me see how the next color looks. Okay, well, now I have to reach the end of that color, if not it's silly. And now let me see how the new color looks, etc., etc. And it's just, yeah, it's just so much fun. I absolutely love it. It's really, really lovely. So I believe that I had already shown you this when I started this. So this will be the center of the blanket. Okay, what's a bit annoying is that it's so much fun to knit, but it's impossible to photograph and to share project pictures of. I'm so happy with it, and I can't show it because it looks bad, because it's not blocked, right? Especially since my tension is not perfect, because you have to magic loop. And enough with the damn military planes. There's a military camp in town, and basically it's been a week and they're doing maneuvers with like the fight planes, whatever they're called, and it's just non-stop for 1 week, and I'm not exaggerating. It's not like they're doing it 3 times a day. No, it's every 10 to 15 minutes one plane goes. Like, aha! I don't think you can hear it, but it's kind of icky me. Colourwork. So yeah, it's not blocked, and it's a bit so it's not really pretty to show, but well. So this will be the center square. You start with the magic circular cast on, and then you make a square by increasing on 4 lines. So it's a square, but in the actual blanket it will be like this, right? So this I had already made, and I have made the 2 squares that will be on either side of those. So the pattern tells you you make this motif X times, and then it shows you there's a sketch with the position of everything. And this, so I've done it twice, and I think those are peacocks. I'm not sure. I think so. The main yarn I'm using is Lana Grossal Melon Weight, so it's Melon White. It's their sock yarn, which is not merino. I chose this because I wanted to use a sock weight with wool and nylon, not merino, because wool will bloom a little bit more, and it will work better for colourwork. It won't be as sleek as merino, and the nylon will provide a little bit more sturdiness for a blanket, right? So unfortunately, because there's a lot of colors, I have issues finding the complete color palette in that range. So I have a few other yarns, including this turquoise blue, which is their cool wool yarn, which is merino, but since it's not a lot of it, I thought it was okay. I was a bit worried because my main color is much more blue than what the pattern the designer's is. The designer, she calls it light blue. It's almost white really, but because it said blue, I got blue, and so my blanket is gonna be a very blue. And I was a bit afraid of not having enough contrast with some colors because of it. Do you see here this light brown? It's kind of at the limit, and I was afraid about these two as well. It's not as bright as what you see on camera. It's a turquoise. It's not that curacao color, but it's actually fine. I actually think it shows pretty well. So yeah, these little birds are done, and I have started making a third I think they're purposefully flying over my house because I'm complaining. It's fine. You just have a constant grumble, you know, in the background. I've started a third type of motif, and this one I think I need to do it twice as well, or maybe 4 times, I'm not sure. And this is more of a geometric one, which I love because it's a little bit more intuitive with that flowery thing. And this is great because the way that I described to you how I follow my chart, this is just perfect because the shapes are so clear. It's much more easy than the peacock tail. And this is great. Yeah. So I'm going to start again with this blue, my main blue color now, and then there's a little bit of that olive I showed you. And yeah, I'm about 3/4 done now. Each square is 46 rows. I'm on row 30. And yeah, I just about been able to actually knit in the round, right? Because until there, so I'm using 60 centimeter cable with the smaller tips. I'm using Haya. These are my interchangeable needles. It's the one that I like, the short ones. And so I'm using the one that gives me 60 centimeter length of cable, because this way I'm able to magic loop at the beginning, single loop for a while, and then I can knit in the round and I don't have to change cables. I end up being able to knit in the round, which is much more pleasant, and why my tension is much better towards the end than it is in the center, but it will block out. So yeah, I'm having so much fun. I suspect I will be a little bit more whiny when I have to assemble the blanket. I don't mind grafting so much, but I'm more concerned about figuring out how to make a border all around it. So we'll see. But for now, I'm having lots of fun. I hope that I will continuously make progress on it. I had knitted another pattern by the same designer, another blanket, which I love, but I had put it on pause for like several months because I got distracted. And I hope not to do the same with this one, because it's fingering way, it's gonna take a little bit longer, so I think I would like to keep knitting it. The sheep outside do not like the planes either. Did I tell you that I have sheep where I live now? There's a couple of sheep in the back of the garden. They're lovely. They don't like me. Every time I come and try and photograph them, they just stare at me for 1 second and then they go away. Anyway, I have another work in progress that I would like to share, which is a shawl. And it's gonna be rather light shawl that I'm knitting in very autumnal colors. So that's kind of the thing, right? Spring sweater, colourwork blanket, And then a shawl that's light and airy, but is in dark moody colors. I have this to show. So this was the swatch that I initially made, because this was also a pattern that I submitted to magazines like a year and a half ago perhaps, for a modular stole kind of thing. So this is the idea. I just want something that's simple to knit, that doesn't have lace, and that have different fun textures. So there's garter, half brioche, sit stitch, and that slip stitch motif. I just want something simple, not too in over its head. Right, a little bit more of a straightforward shape than the previous modular shawls I've designed. I'm going to make something that is in proportions very different from this, because I want to use 4 colors. I thought that was enough. I am using yarns from a French indie dyer, Célène, in these 4 beautiful colors. So this is Cendre de Rose, rose ashes. Oh, that sounds so sad. Bois de Rose, so rose wood. Vitelotte, which is gorgeous. This is the name for the potatoes, you know, the purple potatoes. I really love that purple. I love it because it's rich, but it's also not so dark. So I thought the sheep had actually entered my garden, but no, it's a cat. Not my cat. And it's walking in a very mischievous way, like cats do. Anyway, it's very saturated, but it's not so dark. I would love a sweater like this, because I think you can make something with a texture and it will show beautifully. And this is Noisette, so hazelnut. Those are the colors I'm using for the actual shawl. And this is what I'm doing. So I have 100-gram skeins of it. I am not going to use all of them. I'm not going to make 1,600 meters shawl, especially since I want it to remain quite fine. So what I'm doing, which is something that I'm usually not good at, is I'm keeping track of how much yarn each section uses. I often forget to do this, but this way you will be able to use leftovers or buy only 50-gram balls of yarn or skein. Do as I say, not as I do. But yeah, I will have lots of leftovers. I don't mind because the colors are so nice, right? I should be able to use them in colourwork, perhaps. That would be nice. Or maybe make another shawl with all 4 of them, but blending them more, because this is gonna be very color block like. But if I can find a stitch texture that sort of mixes them well, I think it would look very pretty. The first section I've knitted using these, and so this I finished with this. I will not use it anymore, and I still have 50 grams. I used a bit less than 50 grams, so that's great. This way people know they only need that amount. And this is what I have so far. So you start here with a little flat tip, and you increase on either side slowly. And I made it so that the increases matched the stripes ratio, so that you don't actually need to count your rows, because you know where you need to make the increases depending on the stripes. You can count your stripes to know when you're done with this section. Easy. You can also do it in just one color if you like, but if you do it with just one color, you'll have to count the rows. But yeah, I finished this section and I've moved on to the second one with this beautiful purple, which I'm now knitting in half brioche and decreasing on one side. So yeah, this basically will be the width of the stole, so you see it's not going to be too big. It's barely 90 stitches, so And yeah, I was afraid that this was a bit of a jarring transition, right? But I'm actually going to reuse the stripe color here, so I think it will tie together well, right? And the other point will be in the hazelnut. So yeah, this will be the Oberon shawl. I don't know why, because I kind of view Oberon as green, and there's no green, but I thought it was okay. Yeah, that is the plan for the show. It should be released in June. I don't know why I chose these colors for June, but I just felt like it. I am knitting this on 3.75mm needles. Usually fingering my shawl, I would use 4mm to reach that basic shawl gauge of 18-19 stitches in garter stitch. But I started with my regular gauge, and I thought that this didn't look right. I think because the main color here is a bit varied, like there's darker and lighter patches, and when it was looser, it sort of was confusing. The stripes were not as well put, and yeah, I didn't want to use a sharp contrast for the stripes, but I still wanted them to be visible. So I tried to tighten it a bit, not so much. I'm probably still at around a 20 stitch gauge per 10 centimeter 4 inches, and I like how it's looking much more. Voila. This is my current work in progress. I'm taking some time off next week, so I don't know when I'll be done with it, and you might see it again as a work in progress on the next episode. We'll see. Maybe not, because it's kind of fun to knit. And now basically all the sections will be decreasing, so I will start with a bigger number of stitches and then I will decrease, which is sort of like motivating you to, and it feels like it goes a bit faster. But yeah, this is it for this episode. I wanted to finish with a little Patreon announcement. So if you don't know, I have a Patreon page which you are free to come and join whenever you want. You can just stay for 1 month and then leave. Even though Patreon is a subscription model, you absolutely do not have to stay for any number of months. When you join Patreon, on the month that you are there, you get 1 or 2 patterns for free, basically, to choose from my indie published designs. And there is also a video every month. I've also started making creative vlogs, which are a little bit more music vlogs, and talking about planes and talking about different things, which I've enjoyed making. But every month there is a dedicated video which is recorded in French, but I subtitle them in English so everyone can watch it. And March's video is a studio tour. I just did a little overview of how I organized my office, how I stored my stash, kinda, and how, like, some organization things that I use for my notions and accessories and tools. And yeah, that is March's video. If you're curious, whenever you join Patreon, you actually see all the previous videos. So now there's kind of a huge back catalog. I think we're almost at 40 videos since the end of 2019. So lots of different things, tutorial, behind the scenes vlogs. There's a couple of free patterns as well that are exclusive to Patreons. And yeah, I would love to see you there if you're interested. And yeah, thank you so much for watching this podcast. I will see you again in a couple of weeks. And have a lovely rest of the afternoon, evening, whenever you are watching this, and I will see you soon. Bye!